Imagine the dusty streets of the Wild West, gunfights at high noon, saloons brimming with outlaws, and the rugged resilience of pioneers carving out their place on the frontier. But what often goes untold is the silent, deadly war being fought against invisible killers, diseases that ravaged towns and turned bustling settlements into ghostly ruins. Life in the Wild West wasn't just about survival, it was a gamble against nature itself. Cholera swept through wagon trains with a vengeance, smallpox obliterated entire families, and tuberculosis lingered like a slow, suffocating shadow. In this era of grit and glory, the fight against disease often relied on primitive remedies that were as dangerous as the illnesses they sought to cure. What would you do if a single sip of water could kill you? Or if the cure for your fever involved mercury, a substance so toxic it might seal your fate faster than the disease? The Wild West wasn't just untamed, it was unrelenting in its challenges. In today's video, we're diving into the harrowing reality of frontier medicine, the bizarre, often shocking treatments settlers turned to in their fight for survival. From laudanum for cholera to whiskey as anesthesia, the line between help and harm was razor thin. So grab your saddle and prepare for a ride into the strange and deadly world of Wild West diseases and their remedies. The Wild West was a land of promise for settlers, offering vast opportunities to carve out new lives on the rugged frontier. However, it also presented a hidden and terrifying adversary: disease. With no running water, poor sanitation, and rudimentary medical care, settlers faced an uphill battle against some of the deadliest diseases in human history. It wasn't just the threat of gunfights or harsh weather that made life dangerous. Disease lurked in every corner, from wagon trails to bustling towns. Cholera, the swift killer. Cholera, a waterborne disease, was one of the most feared ailments to sweep across the frontier. Its symptoms were as sudden as they were deadly: severe diarrhea and dehydration that left victims weak and unresponsive within hours. On wagon trails and in mining camps, settlers often shared the same water sources, unaware that a single contaminated bucket could unleash devastation. It was a cruel irony. Water, the most essential resource for survival, became a silent weapon of death. Entire wagon trains were wiped out by cholera outbreaks. Survivors spoke of burying loved ones hastily by the roadside, often without proper ceremonies. The disease's spread was swift and relentless, and without a clear understanding of its cause, settlers could only watch helplessly as it claimed victim after victim. One harrowing account describes a miners' camp in Nevada, where more than half the residents succumbed in a single week, leaving the survivors too weak to dig graves. Smallpox, the blistering plague. Smallpox wasn't just another illness, it was a scourge that terrorized entire communities. Known for its distinctive blistering rash, smallpox left survivors disfigured and marked for life, if they survived at all. Outbreaks often started with a single infected individual and rapidly engulfed entire towns. Quarantine measures were common, but they were poorly enforced and often came too late to contain the disease. In many cases, infected individuals were abandoned in isolated cabins or makeshift hospitals to fend for themselves. Family members and friends, terrified of contracting the disease, kept their distance, leaving victims to die alone. Smallpox's impact was so devastating that even the hope of an early vaccine brought controversy. Some settlers feared the cowpox inoculation, believing it might turn them into beasts, while others eagerly sought out any measure to protect themselves. On one occasion, a traveling doctor managed to vaccinate an entire village, saving it from destruction, but such successes were rare. Tuberculosis, the White Death. Tuberculosis, nicknamed the White Death for its slow wasting effects, was a grim reality for many settlers. It wasn't as explosive as cholera or as visibly horrifying as smallpox, but it crept into households like an invisible predator, Symptoms included relentless coughing, night sweats, and severe weight loss. The disease was particularly cruel because it allowed its victims to linger for years, slowly draining their strength and hope. Unlike other diseases, tuberculosis wasn't just a health crisis, it was a cultural one. It became synonymous with death, and many frontier families resigned themselves to the inevitability of losing loved ones to its grasp. The common prescription of the time, fresh air and sunshine, was more of a consolation than a cure, giving rise to sanatoriums in remote locations. These institutions offered little more than a peaceful place to wait for the end. Stories from these sanatoriums revealed the loneliness and isolation of patients who could no longer be part of the communities they loved. The unseen toll. The deadliest diseases of the Wild West didn't just claim lives, they shattered communities. Entire families were wiped out, towns were abandoned, and survivors carried scars, both physical and emotional. These illnesses thrived on ignorance and fear, and in their wake they left behind a stark reminder of the fragility of human life on the frontier. Yet even in the face of such devastation, settlers pushed forward. The fight against disease wasn't just a battle against nature, it was a testament to the resilience and determination of those who dared to dream of a better life in the untamed West. Laudanum, the all-purpose painkiller. Laudanum, a tincture of opium mixed with alcohol, was a go-to remedy for nearly everything, including cholera, tuberculosis, and even emotional distress. Marketed as a miraculous cure-all, it was prescribed for ailments ranging from chronic coughs to digestive issues. For many settlers, laudanum was the only relief from the constant hardships of frontier life, but its addictive nature often left devastation in its wake. One notorious case involved a mother in a pioneer settlement who gave laudanum to her infant, hoping to calm incessant crying. Tragically, the child never woke again. Stories like this were not uncommon, as the dosing instructions for laudanum were vague at best and often left to guesswork. For adults, the drug offered temporary respite from physical pain or emotional struggles, but it also created dependencies that crippled lives. Farmers would take laudanum to endure grueling days in the fields, while miners used it to suppress pain from injuries deep within shafts. Over time, entire communities faced the silent epidemic of addiction, with individuals unable to function without the drug. Doctors, too, became complicit, prescribing laudanum without fully understanding its consequences. Cowpox and the early vaccines. The advent of cowpox inoculations marked a turning point in frontier medicine. With smallpox wreaking havoc, desperate settlers turned to the rudimentary practice of inoculation as a lifeline. The process was not for the faint-hearted. Cowpox pus was scraped into open wounds on a patient's arm, triggering immunity to the more deadly smallpox virus. One heroic account describes a traveling doctor who vaccinated an entire frontier town during an outbreak. He harvested cowpox pus from a local dairy cow and went door to door, saving dozens of lives. However, the procedure was not without risks. Some patients developed severe infections, while others rejected the vaccine entirely due to rumors of turning into cattle. Resistance often stemmed from superstition, but those who embraced the treatment found a lifeline in the face of near-certain death. Among Native American tribes, smallpox vaccination efforts met mixed reactions. While some tribes accepted cowpox inoculations after witnessing their effects, others resisted, citing fears of betrayal or unfamiliar practices. These cultural clashes highlighted the complex intersections of traditional medicine and frontier science. Snake oil and miracle elixirs. Snake oil salesmen became infamous figures of the Wild West, capitalizing on settlers' desperation for cures. These traveling showmen pitched miracle elixirs that promised to heal everything from arthritis to tuberculosis. Their sales tactics were as dramatic as their claims: public demonstrations, glowing testimonials, and charismatic speeches. Many of these concoctions contained little more than alcohol, morphine, or harmless herbs, but the promises sold hope to the hopeless. One particularly audacious salesman toured mining camps with a potion he claimed could cure lung ailments common among miners. The cure was later revealed to be a mix of grain alcohol and water, but not before the man had made a fortune. Settlers, desperate for relief, often spent their last coins on these fraudulent remedies, only to be left sicker and poorer. Yet these showmen inadvertently spread basic medical knowledge, albeit unintentionally. Many settlers learned about the potential benefits of herbal remedies from observing the demonstrations, even if the advertised products were fraudulent. In some cases, these lessons inspired settlers to experiment with their own homemade cures. Mercury, medicine turned poison. Mercury was the frontier's grim paradox, both a cure and a poison. Used extensively to treat syphilis, mercury ointments and pills caused side effects that were often worse than the disease itself. Patients endured symptoms like severe mouth ulcers, hair loss, and neurological damage, all while believing they were being healed. One harrowing tale recounts a settler in a mining town who underwent mercury treatment for syphilis. The prolonged exposure left him unable to walk or speak coherently, yet he continued the treatment out of fear of the disease's stigma. Such tragedies were common, as the medical community had few alternatives and clung to mercury as a last resort. Doctors sometimes prescribed mercury for non-venereal diseases as well, compounding its dangers. From digestive complaints to fevers, mercury became a one-size-fits-all solution with catastrophic consequences. It wasn't until the 20th century that safer, more effective treatments rendered mercury obsolete. Bloodletting, a grim tradition. Bloodletting, the practice of drawing blood to balance humors, persisted on the frontier despite mounting evidence of its inefficacy. Barbers often doubled as surgeons, wielding blades or leeches to perform this grisly procedure. Patients seeking relief from fevers, headaches, or even mental illness often left weaker than before. Some settlers turned to bloodletting preemptively, believing it would prevent illness altogether. A barber's journal from Kansas detailed one family's annual visit for preventive bloodletting. Tragically, the family succumbed to typhoid fever shortly after their last session, a sobering reminder of the practice's futility. In cases of infection, bloodletting often worsened the patient's condition, yet the practice endured, rooted in centuries-old beliefs. It wasn't uncommon for patients to undergo multiple rounds of bloodletting, each leaving them more vulnerable than the last. Whiskey, anesthesia of the frontier. When injuries struck and modern anesthetics were unavailable, whiskey filled the gap. Whether poured over wounds to sterilize them or consumed to dull pain, whiskey became the frontier's multi-purpose remedy. In saloons and homesteads alike, it was a staple of medical improvisation. One dramatic account tells of a cowboy who was bitten by a rattlesnake. With no access to a doctor, his companions poured whiskey over the wound and made him drink enough to lose consciousness while they cauterized the bite. The cowboy survived, but his liver paid the price for his impromptu treatment. Whiskey wasn't without its dangers. Settlers frequently underestimated its potency, leading to alcohol poisoning in cases of overuse. Still, its availability made it a cornerstone of frontier medicine, even if its efficacy was questionable. Amputation, the last resort. Amputation was a grim reality for settlers who suffered severe injuries. Without anesthesia, the procedure relied on speed and brute force. Surgeons used saws to sever limbs, while assistants restrained the patient and attempted to stanch bleeding. A heated iron was often applied to cauterize the wound, a process as agonizing as the amputation itself. One particularly vivid story recounts a farmer who accidentally shot himself in the leg while hunting. With no doctor available, his neighbors performed the amputation using a butcher's saw. The farmer survived the procedure, but later succumbed to infection, highlighting the limits of frontier medical knowledge. Despite its brutality, Amputations saved countless lives, allowing settlers to adapt with makeshift prosthetics and continue their work. For many, the loss of a limb was a small price to pay for survival. On the harsh frontier, settlers often relied on ingenuity and tradition to treat their ailments. With trained doctors miles or even days away, folk remedies and survival instincts became the backbone of frontier medicine. Herbal concoctions, superstitions, and Native American practices all played a role in the fight against disease and injury. Herbal remedies and midwives. In the absence of formal medical care, settlers turned to nature for solutions. Midwives, who were often the most experienced healers in a community, used herbs like raspberry leaf for childbirth and willow bark for pain relief. These remedies, passed down through generations, were lifelines for families isolated from professional care. One famous herbalist, known as Mother Nettie, gained a reputation in her Missouri settlement for saving lives with her homemade salves and teas. Her remedies combined European herbal traditions with Native American knowledge, blending the best of both worlds to treat infections, fevers, and even childbirth complications. Midwives often worked under dangerous and unsanitary conditions. Without sterile tools or antiseptics, they relied on intuition and experience. Their resourcefulness saved many lives, but the risks were ever present. A common remedy for postpartum bleeding involved steeping yarrow in boiling water, a treatment that worked surprisingly well in the absence of modern medicine. The cure for scurvy, lemons and limes. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a scourge of the frontier. Pioneers, especially those on long wagon journeys, often subsisted on dried meat and grains, leaving them vulnerable to the disease. Symptoms included swollen gums, muscle weakness, and eventual death if untreated. Citrus fruits became a prized commodity among settlers who understood their life-saving properties. One account tells of a wagon train leader who demanded his party carry barrels of lemons on their journey westward. His foresight likely saved dozens of lives, as scurvy outbreaks were common among unprepared travelers. For those without access to citrus, settlers experimented with alternative remedies like pine needle tea, which contained small amounts of vitamin C. While not as effective, these improvised treatments helped some pioneers survive the long, barren winters. Typhoid fever in mining camps. Mining camps, often crowded and unsanitary, were breeding grounds for typhoid fever. Contaminated water sources and poor hygiene practices turned these bustling hubs of activity into death traps. When outbreaks occurred, entire camps were sometimes abandoned, leaving behind grim reminders of the disease's devastation. Survivors recounted desperate attempts to purify water by boiling it or adding herbs, believed to have cleansing properties. These efforts met with mixed success, but they highlight the ingenuity and determination of settlers facing unseen threats. Some miners even adopted Native American practices of using charcoal as a water filter, an early example of cross-cultural learning on the frontier. Native American healing practices. Native American tribes possessed a wealth of medicinal knowledge, much of which they shared with settlers. Plants like echinacea were used to treat infections, while sage was burned in ceremonies believed to cleanse the body and spirit. These practices, rooted in centuries of tradition, often proved effective in addressing ailments that baffled Western medicine. In one recorded instance, a group of settlers suffering from dysentery was aided by a nearby tribe. The tribe prepared a tea made from the inner bark of the slippery elm tree, which eased the settlers' symptoms and likely saved their lives. Such exchanges of knowledge underscored the importance of collaboration in overcoming the challenges of the frontier. Superstitions and spiritual remedies. Medicine on the frontier wasn't just about herbs and potions. It was also deeply entwined with superstition and faith. Many settlers believed in charms, prayers, and rituals to ward off disease. Some carried amulets made of animal bones, while others buried objects like horseshoes under their homes to protect against illness. One peculiar practice involved curing stones, which were heated and placed on the body to draw out sickness. While these methods lacked scientific basis, they provided psychological comfort and a sense of control in a world filled with uncertainty. Spiritual healers, both among settlers and native tribes, played crucial roles in communities. Their ceremonies, often involving chants, dances, and offerings, were seen as essential in the fight against disease. While skeptics dismiss these practices, their cultural significance cannot be overstated. Life on the Wild West frontier was not just a fight against outlaws or harsh weather. It was a battle for survival against unseen killers. Diseases like cholera, smallpox, and tuberculosis, combined with primitive and often dangerous treatments, made every day a test of endurance and ingenuity. Yet amidst the hardships, the settlers' resilience shone through. From the herbal remedies of midwives to the innovative but risky use of cowpox inoculations, the pioneers adapted and fought against the odds. They borrowed from Native American traditions, leaned on folk wisdom, and sometimes placed their trust in dubious snake oil salesmen, all in a desperate bid to survive. Looking back, the remedies of the Wild West may seem crude or even absurd, but they were a testament to human determination. The settlers' willingness to try, fail, and learn laid the foundation for the medical advancements we benefit from today. Their grit and courage remind us that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, survival is always possible. So next time you reach for an aspirin or visit a modern hospital, remember the stories of those who came before us, those who battled disease with little more than hope, resourcefulness, and a bit of whiskey. If you enjoyed learning about the bizarre and fascinating history of frontier medicine, don't forget to like this video, share it with history enthusiasts, and subscribe for more stories from the past.